Hi. Welcome to the first day of Banned Films Week. And what would this week celebrating U.S. obscenity laws start with but a video about British obscenity laws? Trust me, this one's interesting.
Talking British censorship can be a bit odd as an American. We tend to think of Britain as pretty similar to the US. I mean, we're both English-speaking countries, and especially in the age of the internet, we're exchanging a lot of culture. I mean, just look how many British YouTubers I follow. It's easy to forget how different we, and especially our governments, can be. Britain has some of the strictest censorship laws of any first world nation, and they were even stricter not long ago.
See, in America, following the introduction of the MPAA in 1968 and the Miller case, one of the cases we're celebrating this week, you can basically make a movie with whatever you want in it as long as it's not illegal. You know, snuff films, child porn, that kind of stuff's right out. But other than that, you can show whatever you want. There are rules about who you can show it to, and a lot of theaters are picky about what they'll show, but you just distribute it straight to DVD. Doesn't matter what you show.
The Motion Picture Association of America rates every movie submitted to it. They have, from my research, only ever rejected a rating for one film, and that was a very special case we will definitely be discussing this week. Now, sometimes distributors can reject a film's given rating and release it unrated, but that's a personal decision. The British Board of Film Classification, on the other hand, if they don't like your film, they won't rate it. And without a certificate, you can't show your film in British theaters and no one gets to see it. Or at least, no one got to see it until 1977.
A new dimension of sight and sound. Scotch EG all-purpose video cassettes L750 or T120, only $4.99.
Put the blame on VCR. It's pretty easy to limit what happens in a public place such as a theater, but it's a lot harder to stop things being printed on VHS. And seeing as there were no laws against it, companies began releasing movies that might otherwise get banned. Even in 1984, when a bill passed requiring all videos to carry a BBFC certification, people just began importing them from other parts of Europe. But for the first 7 years of VHS's existence, anyone could print anything. And just in time too, because this was the golden era of exploitation films.
I said in my review of Drive Angry, or will say in my review of Drive Angry if it's not out yet, that exploitation is more a genre of advertising than it is a genre of film, and it was definitely the advertising that got these films in trouble.
Something many people point to as a breaking point was this advertisement for Abel Ferrara's Driller Killer. Eventually, the British Video Association created a video packaging review committee out of fear that the government might start cracking down on them, but to no avail. The good, wholesome citizens of Britain couldn't stand by. Enter Mary Whitehouse.
Well, we start with violence to the truth, if I may say so. I mean, there are now over 700 pieces of scientific... I'll send you some.
Mary Whitehouse was a far-right political activist who founded the pressure group National Viewers and Listeners Association, or NVALA, or NVALA, if you're me. It was actually this group that popularized the term video nasty, as it was never actually used in any official sense, at least not to my knowledge. As you might suspect, Whitehouse and NVALA were not very popular, in the way moral panic groups tend not to be. Whitehouse was so hated, in fact, that someone started a porno mag named Whitehouse just to spite her. So what could be a greater endorsement than one of the most hated, morally overbearing, pro-censorship women in Britain condemning your movie? So the British distributors of Cannibal Holocaust sent her a copy. And boy did that ever backfire. It was after this the NVALA really dug in their heels in opposition to these video nasties, pushing for legal action against owning and distributing them.
Now it should be noted that Mary Whitehouse, by her own admission, never watched a video nasty.
I have never seen a video nasty. I wouldn't. I have far too much.
But how can you judge on a video nasty?
Oh,
Have you never
easy.
seen one?
I actually don't need to see visually what I know is in that film.
Are you kidding me? I wrote like a 5 to 6 page script about the TV show Charmed and then never made it because I was worried I hadn't seen enough of the series. And you can just get films you've never seen banned. Because see, for as many people as didn't like Mary Whitehouse, there was one person who seemed to like her. Motherfucking Margaret Thatcher.
Here's another gap I have to bridge. America's biggest exposure to her is that Meryl Streep movie, but Margaret Thatcher fucking sucked. She's like Ronald Reagan crossed with your overly strict grandma, except instead of fighting the USSR like Reagan did, she fought Irish people who just wanted their damn country back. And so, pretty soon, Thatcher's director of public prosecution, Thomas Hetherington, began pulling films from shelves under the pretense that they might be found in violation of the Obscene Publications Act of 1959, which had expanded to include pornographic videos in 1977. And you heard me right, might be found in violation. These films weren't in violation of anything yet, they just might be. Soon police were raiding video stores and taking anything they thought had a chance to be considered obscene. Everything from Apocalypse Now to Best Little Whorehouse in Texas to, seriously, The Big Red One, because they thought it was a porn. And then, unlike our friend Mary, they'd sit there and watch these movies. But on the job. On taxpayer money. Someone had to make clear which movies should and shouldn't be seized.
So we're this deep into the video, and I still kind of haven't explained what a video nasty is, and I think that speaks to how muddled the concept is. And to be fair, video nasty was a colloquial term. It was used to describe a lot of films that aren't officially considered video nasties. So, allow me to explain.
The DPP created 3 lists of movies. Section 1 video nasties were all the movies that were found guilty of obscenity and completely banned from the British market. 33 films ultimately ended up on this list, however, we want to focus on Section 2. Section 2 included all the films that had yet to be tried as obscenity, but that the DPP were reasonably certain could be prosecuted. This list, at one time or another, featured 72 movies that were banned in Britain, pending a court case. These 72 films are what people specifically refer to as the video nasties. To be completely clear, these films were treated as guilty before proven innocent. And even if you won your case, it wasn't over. Section 3 contained all the films that the DPP thought might be obscene, but weren't totally sure, as well as any Section 2 movie found to be not obscene. So while these films weren't banned, they were, and this is a direct quote, liable for seizure and confiscation under less obscene charges. Less obscene than obscenity? Are these films illegal or not? This is the part I still get hung up on, and I'm not sure people even knew back then. And it certainly added to the confusion that the DPP tried very hard to keep their lists out of people's hands, assuming that once people got their hands on the list, they'd begin seeking out these films.
Which, to be fair, I've seen 22 of these 72 movies, and I would not have watched about half of them if they weren't on this list. On the other hand, it's really hard to follow the rules when you don't know what the rules are.
Now, I'm tempted to say that's by design. Look, call me a conspiracy theorist, but you can't criticize the enforcement of the rules if you don't know what the rules are. And to be clear, people were arrested over this. Selling movies. Fictional movies that had no actual illegal activity in them, despite what a handful claimed.
Oh, we'll get to you, Snuff. Don't you worry.
It's a bit unclear how many people were arrested, but it seems it wasn't that many. But even then, there are a few fishy things about how these rules were enforced. People have pointed out how much the list tended towards smaller, independent films, though this can largely be explained away by the fact that bigger studios could afford to pay money to get a BBFC certificate, and were much more likely to play ball when it came to making cuts. This criticism also ignores more commercial movies on the list, like Evil Speak, which was distributed by a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. Much more conspicuous is that of the 72 films on the list, not a single one is British. For sure, there are films like Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, which, as the title suggests, was shot in Manchester, or films like The Beyond, which features British actors, but both of these films were directed and produced by Italians and originally released in Italy.
Now, British nationalism is something I have neither the time nor the expertise to get into right here, but just think about how widespread nationalism is here in America, and strip away the fact that we are built on land that we stole from non-white people, by non-white people, and advertised, mostly to white people, as a melting pot of different cultures. Strip all that away, and then stick it on a tiny island in the middle of the ocean. And then imagine that tiny island in the middle of the ocean used to control half the world, and now only controls that tiny island. Yeah, there's a reason Britain hates everyone.
So you can see them pushing back against the brutish films of the Italians or the Americans or whoever it was. Maybe British filmmakers were more likely to stay within the lines, but a lot of these films caught heat for being uncut, unrated versions, and there were almost certainly unrated cuts of British horror. After a little over a year, this fiasco came to a head, and the Video Recordings Act of 1984 got passed, demanding all videotapes carry a BBFC certificate.
Which is probably what they should have done in the first place. Or, just let people watch the movies they want to watch.
I'm sure that helped to boost the popularity of any Video Nasties too, since now anything without a certificate was banned, though then you have a much harder time getting a hold of them. And of course then, Britain's heavy censorship laws came down on everything released. In fact, the BBFC was even stricter on VHS than they were for theatrical releases, partially because it was easier for kids to get a hold of, but also because they were worried about people rewinding and rewatching particularly gory bits.
Which is kind of the opposite of how it is here in America, where home media is where you're likely to find the uncut version. Meanwhile, in Britain, films like The Exorcist saw a theatrical release, but weren't on home video till 1999. And this wasn't even one of the Nasties.
So yeah, eventually Britain caught up with the rest of us. The movies NVALA railed so hard against have been released, some even uncut, and they're beyond easy to get a hold of in America.
Even before I cared about Video Nasties, I actually owned one. The Evil Dead, one of my favorite movies. And since then I've actually gotten two more. Flesh for Frankenstein, a very funny horror comedy that was produced by Andy Warhol. And Blood Feast, which was one of the very first splatter flicks, so I kind of respect it for that, even if the film's not that great. And these two I actually bought at a local store, and this is a British import. And that's just the ones I own physically. There are 20 plus completely uncut Video Nasties on Amazon Prime. Any Brit with a VPN could watch these. And that's not mentioning all the ones that are on YouTube. Not even illegally. Driller Killer is public domain, which is why I'm live streaming it. So what can we learn from this?
First and foremost, don't trust moral panic. It's a tactic used by authoritarians to cause confusion and hysteria so they can swoop in and enforce their narrow ideology. Second, art is art, and even when it comes from an attempt to exploit sex and violence, censorship only begets more censorship. They came for the killer nuns, and I said nothing because that movie's not very good. And when they came for Evil Dead, there was no one left to speak for me. Thirdly, censorship only creates more demand for the thing you're trying to keep out of people's hands.
And hopefully, we learn not to do it again. Which is a lot to learn from Last Orgy of the Gestapo. Until next time, I'm Matt, and happy Banned Films Week.
At the flood, my TV screen is seeking blood.
Hey, it's your boy, Matt. Just wanted to say that this song is really good and ties into the topic of Video Nasties because it's the first place a lot of people heard of Video Nasties. So now it's fair use, and I can use it in my end credits. Fuck the corporate world. Anarchy music, my ass.
Taxi!